One fund, on point for today, the expert to talk about it. This is the ETF of the week. Yes, welcome to the ETF of the week, where we get the latest take from Todd Rosenbluth, the head of research at VettaFi. And if you go to VettaFi.com, you will find all the tools you need to be a savvier, smarter ETF investor and get more details on the new, newsworthy, trending, and timely ETFs that we talk about here. Todd Rosenbluth, it's great to chat with you again.
I'm so glad to be back.
Your ETF of the week is
the Global X U.S. Infrastructure Development ETF, ticker PAVE. PAVE.
PAVE. It is the Global X U.S. Infrastructure Development Fund. Why this fund now?
Well, first of all, we're heading into July 4th, and so we're celebrating the U.S. and celebrating U.S. spending. We have certainly seen that in the last couple of years. Infrastructure spending has been a long time coming, but in the last couple of years, we've seen $450+ billion of money get spent by the U.S. government to repair roads, bridges, to build up the infrastructure that was much maligned for a number of years. This is something that we think will survive and continue to see spending regardless of how the election comes out. And this ETF PAVE is uniquely positioned to benefit from these trends because of its diversified approach across the spectrum.
Uniquely, that's an interesting word, because there are plenty of infrastructure funds. Obviously, you could have picked them. You picked this one. What is so unique?
So what we like is that this is exposed to industrials and materials companies, but it's across the spectrum. So there are companies that are going to benefit from the supply chain in order to help get things ready for infrastructure spending and then carry out that spending. And it's well diversified. This takes a research-oriented approach to building the overall index. We like that. It's relatively cheap. It's from a thematic ETF provider, Global X, that prides itself on offering this type of suite of products. And they do a lot of research to help you get up to speed on the underlying trends. In fact, it helped us to get up to speed. So we really think this Global X ETF is well positioned to benefit, and it's doing relatively well as of late.
The uniqueness of this fund seems to show up in the idea that if you look at annualized performance, it's been basically at the top of its peer group in almost every calendar year since its first full one back in 2018. Whenever I see something and you go, oh, you look and you go, maybe there's a competitive edge, that's when I worry that it'll regress to the mean. You've obviously said this fund seems to be better. So funds can stay at the top of the charts and at the head of the peer group, or is it maybe a little different than those other funds in terms of, do we need to think more that this has more risk or this has more whatever, or there's something that is so different about it that maybe it's miscategorized?
So I think it possibly might not be categorized the way in a peer group that's broad enough. So this is a thematic oriented ETF that holds industrials and materials companies. So I don't know how it's classified in the data that you're using, but if it falls under a sector-oriented group, then of course there's going to be performance differences between one sector or another. And even if it's within industrials, because it's not necessarily the industrials you might think of. General Electric is the largest holding in the industrial select sector SPIDER ETF, XLI, that you're not going to find that within this ETF. You're going to find companies that are tied to construction and materials. You're going to find companies that are helping to supply and provide the trucks. We think this is uniquely positioned, and we actually think about it from a bottom-up perspective and how the companies inside are benefiting from the recent spending and the likely future spending that's going to happen. And then also tied to that future spending is artificial intelligence is one of those key themes that many people are focused on right now. They tend to think about the technology sector, but we think AI is, and so do other people, AI is going to lead to a lot more electricity spending. This is an ETF that you get some exposure to that trend as well. So multifaceted, thematic-oriented ETF.
Which raises another question, because normally with a thematic ETF, you go, Well, let's ride the theme as long as we can, but we don't necessarily think that most themes are permanent. But this, well, the infrastructure story is not going away. It might be impacted by things that happen in Washington, but the story's still going to be there. The need's still going to be there. So is this a permanent addition to a portfolio? And what is its role within that portfolio? Where does the money come from somebody who's got a diversified portfolio to add this to their holdings?
So when we at VettaFi hear from advisors about thematic strategies, they're likely using between 5 and 10% of their overall allocation to equities towards a thematic trend. And what they're doing is usually holding between 2 or 3 different themes for the intermediate term. So intermediate term to me is 3 years. And then they're revisiting that based on the fundamentals and whether or not it still makes sense to have within their portfolio. So we think this ETF, PAVE, could be a strategic allocation from a thematic perspective over the next couple of years for people who believe that that trend of infrastructure and infrastructure building in the United States is going to persist. We think it will. Obviously, each investor has to decide if that makes sense. So this is still a small slice of the portfolio, but what we've seen is assets have been building. We've seen net inflows for PAVE thus far in 2024.
It's PAVE, the Global X U.S. Infrastructure Development ETF. It's the ETF of the week from Todd Rosenbluth at VettaFi. Todd, great stuff as always. See you again next week.
I'll see you next week, Chuck.
The ETF of the week is a joint production of VettaFi and Moneylife with Chuck Jaffe. And yes, that's me. And you can learn all about my hour-long weekday show by going to MoneyLifeShow.com or by searching for it wherever you find great podcasts. Now, if you're looking for great information on exchange-traded funds, make sure you go to VettaFi.com, where they've got a full suite of tools that is going to help you out and make you a better investor. They're on Twitter or X at Vetta_Fi. And Todd Rosenbluth, their head of research, my guest, he's on Twitter too. He is at Todd Rosenbluth. The ETF of the week is here for you every Thursday. Make sure you don't miss an episode by following along on your favorite podcast app. We'll see you again next week. And until then, happy investing, everybody.